This is Dennis Raimondi with the Coffee League. My guest today, Mr. Nate Kaiser. Nate is the founder and owner of a Swift Coffee Company out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Before that, he's been in coffee for many years. We'll talk about that. He was with Passenger Coffee. And I have to say, Nate, my wife's aunt lives right outside of Lancaster. And I was there recently. And, I visit dozens of cafes every month. And I actually went to Passenger in Lancaster a few months ago. Fabulous, fabulous cafe, and I believe you were one of the people that set it up. There were a couple of places I went to a couple other places in Lancaster. I was really surprised at the sophistication and the quality of coffee there, because it's not a small town, but it's out in the beautiful countryside Amish area of Pennsylvania. So it was way more than I expected. Uh,
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
T-
You had a
tell,
good time there.
yeah, I had a great time. It's a beautiful area. I live part of the year in Iowa, so I'm familiar with that type of countryside. And also where I live is also not as much an Amish area, but somewhat. And
Yeah.
tell us about your background in coffee. Are you from Lancaster? Tell us a little bit about Passenger Coffee, and then how you got from there into what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually not from Lancaster. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, which is just about an hour and a half south. Um, so I grew up right outside of there. And, to be honest, where I grew up was a bit of a culturally bleak zone. There wasn't much going on. Um, and so I can remember in high school, my friends and I visiting an area, you know, not terribly far away, a little town called Ellicott City, and there was a kind of a charming, quaint cafe there called the Bean Hollow, and we used to hang out there. It was kind of a refuge for us. I think they roasted their own coffee, but I really wasn't a coffee drinker. But it was just this, you know, interesting gathering place that we used to hang out in and probably drink tea and other things like that. But I remember watching, um, the baristas working on manual espresso machines, and I'm kind of a tinkerer by nature. So seeing them, turning knobs and there's steam and it's loud, I became really interested in that. And so I, I applied for a job and didn't get the job. And so I wound up getting my first coffee job sometime around high school at Starbucks, actually. Um, Thinking, okay, if I can work there for a little bit, maybe then I can get hired at this cafe that I used to hang out at. So I worked there for a few months, went through the certification process, and tried to get a job again at the Bean Hollow. Still didn't get a job, but it was ultimately because working at Starbucks, I was able to, eventually work at another cafe that served counterculture, which was really
Right.
my first, exposure into specialty coffee. And so worked at a few cafes, wound up working at another roastery, eventually moving to Lancaster somewhere in all of that, and working at another roastery. You might have visited Square One
Yes, I
Coffee
did.
in
I
Lancaster.
did. Yes.
Yeah. So worked there quite a few years ago, and then met a guy named David Stallings there. We became really great friends. He was roasting for Square One, and eventually, many years later, probably I guess 7 or 8 years later, we reconnected and wound up getting Passenger started here in Lancaster. So that was back in 2014 or 15. I'm trying to remember now, but yeah, I was part of the founding team with that, and my business partner Eric, who is part of Swift Cup, he is also part of the founding team of Passenger as well. So yeah, it was a project that sort of grew out of our work there at Passenger.
All right. And
So
then wanted to say, I hadn't mentioned this in the introduction, that the instant specialty coffee is what
mhm,
Swift Cup Coffee does. Your company. So this is,
that's
and the way I got introduced to this was I was at the Seattle Coffee Expo recently, and I literally ran into Doug Satzman there, who's the CEO of Joe Coffee in New York. He had been with he was a senior vice president with and worked with Starbucks for many years. And I particularly noticed him because I'm a big fan of Joe Coffee in New York. I think they're very high
Hmm.
quality, very consistent in the product that they serve. And he was all over me telling me about this new product they had, specialty instant coffee. And of course, I was very skeptical, but I wanted to try it. And as I told him, I tried it and I was very impressed. And he explained that there's been an evolution in instant coffee had a very bad name for many years for a very good reason. And then
Yeah,
Starbucks developed some new technology, and then you all have developed new technology beyond that. So tell us a little bit about how you made that transition into instant specialty coffee, and what the procedures and processes are like for creating what you create.
sure. Yeah. So just to back up a little bit, when I was working at Passenger, one of my primary roles there was in barista education. So we had a lot of wholesale accounts coming through, and we were, training them to be proficient, preparing coffees and really dealing with some very high-end coffees, which, I certainly love to deal with. But one thing that became very evident to me is that it's very difficult to brew great coffee. I mean, you have to have a lot of things go right for it to taste great. Obviously, it's the biggest battle is what quality of ingredient are you working with, but then there's all of the technical sides of brewing coffee that you have to control, which I love. I love tinkering and I love teaching people how to brew coffee. But at the end of the day, I think what we all really want to do is just enjoy a great cup of coffee. And so there's times for tinkering, there's times for that ritual. But really, I wanted to figure out a way to make these coffees that we were dealing with, these really high-end coffees and the experiences that we were getting at our cafes and roasteries, how can we make that a little bit more accessible? I mean, you mentioned we're in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's a pretty bustling town for how rural of an area it is.
Right.
And we have a thriving coffee culture here, but 10 minutes outside of the city, we're in rural farmland, and where our families are, they don't quite have the same exposure and experience to specialty coffee that we do, working in this very niche industry. So I wanted to create a format that would allow the easiest brewing as possible so that they could just really enjoy the essence of those coffees. And so I kind of became curious by what formats would really offer that kind of experience. So, I thought about things like cold brew and pre-grinding packets and just different things, but ultimately I landed on instant coffee and just how easy it was to prepare. Just add water. There it is. Unfortunately, instant coffee is not very good, and I think that's a pretty common understanding, at least in America. Most people just kind of turn their nose at instant coffee, and I became curious, why is that the case? What is actually causing this product to not live up to what we're experiencing with fresh brewed coffee? And so I started to look into the production methods of producing instant coffee, and I realized that major commodity production of instant coffee is all about efficiency. It's all about quantity over quality. And so I started to think about, well, how can we reform each part of the process to make the primary goal to preserve quality. Obviously, you need to have efficiency in there, but how can you keep quality as a primary focus? So kind of went into a deep dive, started speaking with some chemists and people who are in the world of freeze drying coffee, and and kind of created a thesis of, well, if we produce coffee this way, maybe it would actually turn out to be, really tasty instant coffee. So I put together an idea and convinced my darling wife to let us. Oh man, it's funny to look back at us. To purchase some equipment that we probably shouldn't have purchased and set up a little lab in our basement and just start experimenting. And so yeah, over a period of time, we were able to piece together a small kind of pilot instant coffee plant in our basement. And it really just came out of that curiosity.
Well, let me,
Yeah.
Nate, let me ask you a couple of questions there, because my understanding,
Sure.
and it's very limited in this area, is, what we think of as like instant coffee. It was the instant coffee of yesteryear, and it was made with very low quality coffee, and you just added water, and you had something with caffeine in it. And then you had these, I believe Starbucks had a big breakthrough where they got to, as I understand it, got the roasted coffee beans and were able to have them micro-sized so that they were water soluble. But what you do, and again, I may have this wrong, my understanding is that you, let's say Joe Coffee comes in and you brew their coffee to the point where they like the brew, and then you freeze dry it, and then you break it down into micro particles so that when you add water, you're just recreating what was created in the good brew coffee. It's water soluble. Is that is anything that I said accurate in terms of from what Starbucks is doing to what you're doing now?
Yeah, more or less.
All right, give us the detail.
Yeah. So, basically what we're setting out to do is just preserving a freshly brewed cup of coffee. So it starts with us taking roasted coffee. Obviously, I would say this: our instant coffee is never going to be better than the ingredients we start with. So, having great instant coffee, 80% of the battle is just starting with high quality coffee. So someone like Joe or other roasters send us their roasted coffee. We brew it to a very high extraction concentrate. So we're dissolving a lot out of this coffee. We're basically making a very, very flavorful concentrate. And from there, the coffee, we freeze it to sub-zero temperatures. So very, very, very cold temperatures, negative 50, negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And once the coffee is frozen solid, this concentrate, we, under a vacuum, we start to dehydrate the coffee slowly. And so this is the process of freeze drying, where that ice goes, it's trapped in that coffee concentrate, and it starts to dehydrate, turning into gas, and very slowly removing all of the water out of that coffee concentrate. And so over a period of a couple days, you're eventually left with all of those solubles that you stripped out of the coffee, all the solubles that we, dissolved during the brewing process. So it looks like a big slab of coffee solubles, almost like a big, slab of brownies. So from there, we grind that slab up into smaller particle sizes, and you just add water to it, and it kind of revives it, brings that cup back to life.
How long did it take you to get to the product that you have now, and what were some of the obstacles you ran into on the way?
I feel like we're still trial and error, all the time. We're about 2 years into this,
right?
And I think we learn something new every day. So I think there's a couple pieces to this battle. We're dealing with brewing coffee, which is sort of a science on its own. How we extract soluble material out of the coffee, and we're leaving non-soluble material behind. How do we do so in a concentrated manner? But then there's the freeze drying process, which is also very tricky. How do you preserve aromatics? How do you preserve nuance within the concentrate that we brewed? And so there's kind of two pieces to that puzzle. Figuring out a method that would give us a very flavorful concentrate, and then also how do we preserve that through the process of freeze drying. So early on, when the experiments were happening, the first probably handful of batches were some of the most awful tasting coffee I've ever tasted in my life. I mean, just totally undrinkable.
Mm-hmm.
One of those processes was going wrong. So we sort of had to kind of keep digging in. Okay, like if we brewed the coffee incorrectly, it was producing this result. If we freeze dried the concentrate incorrectly, it produced this result. And so there's a lot of trial and error in that. So eventually we came up with a recipe that started to yield results that I was really pleased by. However, that was great. But when we started to think about how do we actually make this a viable business and a commercial product, you start to think about scalability. And it's very labor intensive and it takes a long time. There's a reason why commodity instant coffee factories are set up to be continuously operating and to be about quantity over quality, because it's really difficult to produce a lot of something that tastes very good. So we had to innovate on the process further to make it to be able to produce any meaningful volume of coffee. And I think that's what we've been spending the last year on, is how do we continue to scale this, preserving as much nuance as possible, but making more than a handful of cups of coffee each month.
Right. And now I would imagine you have a contract now. I don't know with whom else, but I know you do with Joe, and they have 15 locations and are expanding pretty rapidly now. They're mostly in the New York area, New York, Manhattan, Brooklyn. I think they have some places in Philadelphia. How do you handle the demand that they might have, and do you have other major contracts that you need to fulfill? And along these lines, did you have to develop the machinery to do this production, and how complicated was that? And is it something you will have to scale up? Is there a big investment in terms of the equipment involved?
Sure. Yeah. So meeting demand has been tricky, and I guess it's a good problem to have. So I mean, we're very grateful that business has been growing steady, and there's been interest in this product. So like you mentioned, we work with Joe. We also work with a small network of other roasters across the country. We work with about 16 other roasters, and some of them are about the size of Joe as well. And then we also have our own brand of instant coffee that we sell online and wholesale to different cafes. And so managing that demand has been tricky. But I think as of the first of the year, we developed I think a great strategy for scaling. So when we first started, we were able to make perhaps a couple hundred cups of instant coffee a month, and now we're looking at we could do a couple 100,000 cups of instant coffee a month.
Now let me ask you, in terms of the machinery that's used to produce it.
Sure.
Is that stuff that you had to develop, and is it proprietary? Is it stuff that you only have, or do you have competitors? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. So the freeze drying machines themselves are nothing new. I mean, they make small scale ones. They make ones that are the size of a warehouse. So we have machines that do the freeze drying. What we've had to develop was a brewing method that is proprietary to how we actually prepare the coffee. So it accomplishes our goals of creating a very flavorful concentrate. We're able to brew things in a little bit larger batches and accomplish the same goal. So we have a piece of machinery that we developed that works well for us, and as we grow, we'll have to either add to it or continue to innovate larger. But at this point, we're getting there.
Right, Nate. I'm curious in terms of the marketing end of it. When you talk about specialty coffee, most people don't think about instant coffee. They're the other direction. That they're often the consumer is, and we're seeing more and more of this, more sophisticated, more demanding in terms of subtlety of production and every end of it. So when you approach a company like Joe or whomever with specialty coffee, how do they react? What's that like? And then the big challenge is for them to go to their consumer and say, hey, you should try this, because
Right.
it's the antithesis of what some people in specialty coffee would be naturally attracted to, I would think.
Right. I would actually lump myself into that. I think, being, working for, small roasteries and just being deep into the specialty coffee world, I was certainly a skeptic and, someone who would have had all of those same feelings about instant coffee. And I think for good reason. I think the advantage is that we're developing this product with that in mind. We're not necessarily trying to compete with the likes of Nescafe and the consumers that drink that. Our target audience are people that are interested in specialty coffee, and thankfully we are those consumers ourselves. And so I think it started with just creating a product that would preserve as much nuance as possible and deliver a really delicious cup at the end of the day. And to be honest, it hasn't been as daunting as I expected it to be.
Right.
When I started to hand out samples of when we first started to develop this product, I did it sort of quietly and moonlit it at night. And then when I started bringing the product out and getting it in the hands of our colleagues and different roasteries, the response was sort of overwhelming.
Right.
We haven't really had to reach out to roasteries. They've been kind of reaching out to us because this is something they're excited by.
Right.
And so it's been.
I joined it. As I mentioned before, Doug Satzman, the CEO of Joe Coffee, he was the one that introduced me to it, and it's your product you produce for him, and he really wanted me to try it, and I'm skeptical. Instant coffee, really, and I must say I tried it with an open mind, and I was very impressed with the quality. Now for me, my consumption of coffee is that, I try to go to a cafe every day for a variety of reasons, because I write about it, and also I enjoy the coffee culture and having something made with an espresso machine, and then at home I'll use a pour over, either a Chemex or an AeroPress or whatever. And then, but I travel a lot, and I can't always get to a cafe. I can't always make my own coffee, and so this is great for me. Like, for instance, in a couple of days I'm going to San Francisco and I'll be traveling again. And when I get on a plane, I don't care if I'm in the States or in Europe, I can never get a decent cup of coffee. So I will have some instant coffee with me, specialty instant coffee, and I'll be much happier because I won't be on a plane thinking, oh God, I really have to drink this, and maybe this is something the airlines will start buying or whatever, because there are times where, like you said, there are areas that are very rural. I'm out in Iowa part of the year and whatnot, where specialty coffee just isn't to be had anywhere, and so you have this. I'm curious, what are your own coffee consumption habits like? Do you only drink your instant now, or how do you consume coffee?
That's a great question. So let's see. What's kind of interesting is I find myself really only drinking coffee with other people. I'm in this routine right now where every morning we get into the office and I wound up making a Chemex. Like I guess the short answer is no, I don't just drink instant. I still love that ritual of brewing coffee every day. We have some great cafes locally, so obviously frequenting those. I think, usually coffee in the morning. I drink a lot of tea as well, and then there's usually coffee in the afternoon. Now, when I do drink instant coffee, is typically at home. I don't have great water at my house. I don't have kind of the same equipment that I do at the space. So instant coffee has been great there, and traveling as well. But I still brew a lot of fresh coffee for sure.
Right. And with the instant coffee, as far as I know, what I got from Joe, it was it looked like a tea bag almost. You put it in water,
Hmm.
whatever. But will you have variety? Will there be darker and lighter roasts? Will you have an Ethiopian, a Kenyan, a Colombian, or will it always be the same blend?
Yeah, so we want to offer variety. I mean, that's something that we celebrate in specialty is that
Right.
coffees taste like where they come from, and they're all
Right.
unique and different. And so we want to follow suit in an instant. So under the Swift Cup brand, we have 6 different coffees right now. There's a couple East African coffees. There's a couple Latin American coffees, and then when it comes to the other roasters that we work with, I mean, we're probably close to 40 or 50 different types of instant coffee, for different regions and different varietals and all that. So yeah, you have a lot of choices now for that, and so I hope to see as much variety as possible.
Right. And with your process, there are no chemicals added, are there?
No, no, it's not
Because
at all. It's just
because I believe
brewed
it
coffee.
a Nescafe, no, isn't that a brewed coffee with chemicals used to make it more soluble, or as my understanding, it's a very different process, is it not?
Yeah. Um, to my knowledge, there's a few ways of producing instant coffee. We talked about the Starbucks way of like micro grinding and making it soluble that way. There's another method called spray drying, which is arguably a much more scalable way of producing instant coffee. But with that, you also lose a lot of the integrity of the coffee. You're
Hmm.
stripping aromatics, you're stripping intrinsic qualities of that coffee, and basically what that does is you brew the coffee and you atomize it. So you spray it into a really fine mist in a really hot chamber, and it dries that brewed coffee very, very quickly. But again, you're stripping out pretty much anything that's left in that coffee. And so from our standpoint, how we're doing it, we're brewing coffee and we're processing these in batches. Spray drying is dealing with very high heat that dries the coffee,
Hmm.
and we're dealing with the exact opposite. These are sub-zero temperatures. It's very gentle to the coffee. It's a very slow process that allows you to really maintain the integrity of the coffee.
And where do you see Swift Cup Coffee going in the next 5 years into the future? Might you diversify into other areas, or you looking more to really focus on popularizing instant coffee and that it can be of great quality and not just instant?
Yeah, I think our whole goal is to make quality coffee more accessible. And so we're doing that, 2 ways. One is through our own brand of instant that we sell online. And the other one is working with roasters and offering this as a service. And so we see working with trusted, you know, roasters who we admire and are putting out great product as an important piece of this puzzle. They're the ones that are out in the public facing. Joe's a great example. I mean, having high volume, high traffic cafes that are beloved by their neighborhoods. To have baristas be able to speak about this product and get it out to consumers. I think that's a great example of why working with trusted roasters is important to seeing the expansion of specialty instant coffee. So how I see this growing, I don't see a mass exodus from fresh brewed coffee to instant coffee by any means, but I see this product kind of being that supplementary brew, like you're talking about, like when you just don't have access to a cafe, or you don't have, or you're stuck in the office, or you're camping or traveling. I see this being another option. This instant coffee wasn't an option really for those that were interested in quality. I mean, it's a relatively new way of having that. So I see that growing. I see us, continuing to partner with roasters who we trust and admire, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and uh, now if somebody wants to get instant coffee,
Mhm.
aside from going to, I know Joe Coffee carries it, you have some other people carrying it. How can they buy it directly from you? Is there they go to the website? How would one listening in on this, if they wanted to have that experience of a specialty instant, what would you recommend they do?
Yeah, so you can get it from us anytime at swiftcupcoffee.com. We have a kind of a ever evolving menu, so there's usually 5 or 6 different coffees that we'll put on at any time. So there's that. We also offer a subscription, so if you just never want to run out of good coffee again, you can get a subscription where great instant coffee will just show up to your door, and you'll always have something to take with you. So those are the 2 ways. And then on our website too, I would mention there's a subsection there for the different roasters that we work with. There's some great ones out there that I think are doing tremendous things, and they have a full menu on their websites and their cafes as well. So check them out.
Great. And I also want to mention, if you get a chance and you're in the area, check out Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's a great town. I was really very, very impressed with it. And now I remember I went to Passenger Coffee that you helped set up, which is a great cafe. And the other one was, I think, Square One. And right away, when I go to a town, my wife usually does the research, or what do they have in the way of specialty coffee? And we had 2 places that were really world class. So that was fantastic.
Oh, wow.
And then you are located, you don't have a retail segment to your to Swift Cup Coffee in Lancaster, do you?
No, we don't. We just have a little production space here in Lancaster, but yeah, no retail at this point.
Great. Well, I recommend you folks out there try it, be open to it. I was very skeptical. I was deeply impressed with the quality of the coffee that I had, and like I said, I don't think I will ever travel without the specialty instant with me, because there is always times, especially for me when I'm traveling, where I don't have access to a good cafe, and I can't make it myself, or I can't grind the beans. And I mentioned to Doug, I have some Doug Satzman, that is, I have some friends that tell me they'll use an AeroPress on a plane, but too dangerous. Hot water, it's too much movement.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. Now I can just ask the flight attendant for some hot water and make my own. So thank you so very much for taking the time to come on, and give us your website again, and we'll have all this posted up, but go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So yeah, you can find us at swiftcupcoffee.com.
swiftcupcoffee.com, and like I said, we'll have all that posted up. Thanks again, Nate. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.